Good morning, good afternoon, and hello. Welcome to this month's webcast, Internal Communication Strategies at Today's Nonprofits. Today's webcast is brought to you by 501c Agencies Trust. We know that many of you today already work with 501c Agencies Trust, and we really appreciate you continuing to work with us. 501c Agencies Trust is the nation's oldest unemployment program. So I have a bit of housekeeping, as you all know, before we get started. If you have any questions, most of you know how to use the dialog box of GoToWebinar. You just submit a question in that box, and that will shoot to myself and our panelists, and we will answer those questions throughout the webcast and then save a bank of them for the end. So we will answer your questions throughout, so please don't hesitate to shoot those to us. Our speakers would love to address your questions as they go. Today's session is being recorded. Everybody on the call, and those of you who may have missed it, will receive a recording of the session. You can then re-review it or share it with friends and colleagues as you need. Today's session is worth recertification credit for our human resources professionals. We have both SHRM and HRCI available for today's webinar. It'll be an hour worth of credit or 1 credit. In order to receive that credit, you do need to complete the survey at the end of the event. So when we're done, the survey will pop up. You can answer it right then and there, and a copy of the survey will be emailed to you. So if you need to step away, go to lunch, go to another meeting, you can answer that survey later today. Don't feel like you have to do it right at the end of the session. You can do it later today. We'll send it to you by email. Today's webcast, the slides are also available in the handout section of your GoToWebinar dialog box there. You can download those now, take notes as you need. And as always, we do these once a month. We will be doing a few more this year than 12, so we'll hope you stay tuned. And if there's anything you guys ever want us to cover, please don't hesitate to email me. You'll get my email address at the end of the day and suggest topics. Because we love to hear from you guys and give you exactly what you want to hear. So these are our 2 wonderful panelists today, Layla and Jesse. Very briefly, Jesse is the founder of You, We, Us. His ideas on cultural mindfulness, systemic resilience, and the analytics of human dynamics evolved from his own unique interests and his own personal history. Working with diverse socioeconomic and cultural demographics helped grow his understanding of sociocultural dynamics and redefined his distinctive approach to problem solving, which we'll hear more about how he does that today. Layla is the president of Tantra Life Coaching. She specializes in guiding individuals to their fullest selves. So hopefully at the end of today's session, we'll all be better than we were when we started. She teaches how to connect effectively with ourselves and in turn those around us. Her studies have involved in integrative holistic health, homeopathy, theta healing, breath work, yoga therapy, and other types of meditation and stress management. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and Jesse and Layla, I'm going to give you all control here. And you feel free to take it away.
There we go. Hi.
Good morning.
Oops, I gave you the wrong control. 1 second.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, while we get that back, you know, it's really wonderful to be here. I wonder how the audio is. I'm always curious. Hey, look at that.
All right, hang on. Sorry, guys, I hit the wrong button.
No worries.
All right, give it a shot now. There you go.
Yeah? No. Okay, there we go.
There we go. Hi. So this is Jesse. It's nice to be here. It's really wonderful. Before we go, you know, there's communication strategies change so fast, and I want to address, I think, something that we all woke up to this morning that's really amazing and important to talk about. Maybe the biggest communication issue going on today is the Oscars. Wow. What a wonderful example of awkwardness and confusion in communication. It was and has been a very interesting response as well, and looking at the way the way Twitter has responded to it is a good start to look at this new approach to discourse and a dialectic, which is now polarity. Binary arguments. There is only two positions. You are either okay with the speech. I don't know how much TMZ and BuzzFeed everyone consumed this morning, but the look and the awareness of the one presenter that they didn't win, and then he goes and gives his speech anyway. Is that a moment of triumph and, you know, that's great that he thanked his family, or is that a disrespectful moment to a minority shot film in the face of maybe even a conspiracy within the, you know, PricewaterhouseCoopers? Well, it's the answer to that isn't as important as the positions that people are taking. And what's going on in this age of rage, as I think is fantastic to describe this, is really about the entrenched positions, the hard line that people are taking that is either an us or a them. What you see happening around these difficult sociocultural questions, these difficult dynamics, is a new approach and an evolving approach that requires a continuous evaluation of one's own position and principles, your organization's principles, and commitment and willingness, along with how your community and how your organization feels at any given time. There's less hard and concrete ways to do it. There is strategies with which to approach it.
Yes. So as Jesse's saying, linguistics around race, class, and gender is constantly changing. Excuse me. And it's our shared mission as leaders to stay abreast to those constant changes. We believe that the only way we can move forward into productive and successful futures is when we've taken a deep look into ourselves and our socially constructed barriers and how those inhibit us from fully embracing the people around us. So my wheelhouse is meditation and stress relief and relaxation. So I'd like for us to just all take a really deep breath in. Maybe even close your eyes. Think about the people that surround you in your everyday life. And find the people that are costing you the most energy, and then catalog the way that that makes you feel. So today in the world, it's essential to be mindful of one's own cultures and constructs, thinking about how the personality of others are truly understood, and if an individual fails to understand the impacts that they themselves have on the environment due to their own cultural conditionings, we just think that the most value you can have and add to others is to know yourself first. So throughout this webinar, we'd like for you to remember that all of our connections are mirrors to ourselves, and essentially you can't be mindful of yourself. If you can't be mindful of yourself, then you can't be mindful of others.
So cultural mindfulness is a connection of a lot of approaches to how do I deal with other people that aren't like me. And from a simple marketing strategy, it's how do I make myself the most welcoming to the widest variety of people, and do that without losing myself in the process? What are my core values? What are my organizational core values? And what's my bottom line? We've approached navigating difference with an odd deference, and that's a kind of a funny alliteration, but the idea of political correctness that has permeated the last 30 years of how do I deal with cultural, sociocultural, race, class, gender, age differences, was as much about perception as it was about personality. How can I avoid putting my foot in my mouth so that I can keep talking to people. Conversely, this evolving mission that is, I want to say whatever's on my mind anytime I want to, is an interesting polar opposite almost of that. Really getting at the same thing. I want to be unconstrained with how I feel about what's going on around me. It's a really interesting dichotomy that's evolved, and there is a better way to approach that. And this idea of mindfulness in these engagements, whether it's large communication or person-to-person, peer-to-peer, peer-to-supervisor communication, with a cyclical process, with connecting myself with my own process, I can remove the socio-political, the meta, the stuff on the outside, the questions of morality that are asked when I have to make critical decisions.
So if we go back to the other, go ahead.
Okay, so we're talking about really difficult things. We're talking about stuff that isn't simple. I think complex problem solving from a physics, from a mathematical perspective, is an interesting way to approach human dynamics because it's not easy. If you think that complex problems like race, class, gender, poverty are hard to deal with and they're complex, then complex answers and complex solution making is required to address them. And in that sense, a diversity of perspective, a diversity of approaches is valuable, just in that sense. From my own cultural mindfulness process, if I'm trying to solve a problem that's difficult in my organization, I need to figure out how much diversity in that problem solving is necessary and tailored.
So we actually ended up skipping a slide here, and I'd like to, it's okay. I'd like to just add on to what Jesse was saying. We missed the compassionate communication, building a resilient self, and it goes off to what Jesse was just talking about. At the core of my teaching, I believe that asking us questions of who am I, or what are the core values of our organization, and what are the core beliefs, my core beliefs or my organization's core beliefs and values. So once we know who we are, and we have to take that into interacting with others and how my needs are being met and how other people's are being met, and how we can find our way to come to a middle ground to meet both parties' needs at our bottom core values. And if they're not being met, how much of my needs actually need to be met to come to a happy medium so that we can all fulfill our jobs at the best of our abilities. So one thing that really trips us up in life is mind reading, and it's something we all try to do, but often we fail miserably at it. And if there's an issue within your organization or within your personal one-on-one communication with another person in your organization, what I would like to bring forth is to step back from the situation and think about how much you might be projecting onto the situation, and actually how much of that is true facts. So compassionate communication is about speaking in true statements and alleviating the personal emotion that may be behind it. So again, taking responsibility for ourselves, acknowledging what our needs are, and listening to what the needs of others are and may be. So then we'll go on to...
So which slide? Where are we at? We're at the metacognitive.
No, we're at complex.
We're in complex problem solving.
No,
I think
we already did that. So then we come to the micro.
The micro and macro self.
So the micro and macro self, the reason we put this on here is that it's really important to know that we are these microcosms within a macrocosm of our universe and our environment. Meaning that what is within us is also outside of us. So we learn about ourselves so that we can take them into our personal structures, our professional structures, excuse me. And so we have to learn about how to be this microcosm within a macrocosm, the individual within a workplace, right? So it's much like designing a business plan. If we have to determine what our end goals are and what are the steps that we have to get from where we are to where we need to be, and that's getting down to business. What is our bottom line, and what does it take to resolve the barriers that stand in our way to get there? So we have these programs in place that focus on a lot of self-work that can help the individual and your team as a whole to break through and maybe let go of these constructive barriers that stand in the way of achieving these goals. So the most important thing that I'd like to get across is that we can learn to build on each other's strengths while staying mindful to ourselves and those around us. So next slide.
Next, please. Mac, thanks for taking the slides over. I lost those buttons on here. There we go. Hey,
there we go.
So let's try and connect some of these very esoteric and kind of far out there ideas to what we're actually talking about. And I loved the questions, in particular about how do we address impersonal communication? How do we address large pieces of data, large amounts of information to a wide variety of people in a way that they're halfway even interested in it? What am I talking about? This metacognitive process that we go through, whether we're interacting with someone whose name we can't pronounce, or we're engaging with a small group of folks that are English language learners, or outside of our age range, or class dynamic, or frame of reference in any way. How do we address this? And we do it. We're all doing this cyclically, this thinking about our thinking. We have an understanding. If I asked this group of folks, hey, I need to do a presentation, I'd like you to do a presentation on this subject, on race, class, and gender, to a small group of people at your organization, everyone started to ask themselves questions. How long? When? Who? What's a small group? What are you talking about? Those are the meta questions that inform the decision making. Inform the smoothness of your delivery, of your process, of your production. And incorporating newness, this diffusion of innovations, is essential in this process. So it's one thing to think about what you're doing, and it's another to have an evaluation of that communication. Did I do this well? Did I do this smoothly? Do I have more data that I can incorporate so I can get better the next time? And that's talked up a lot in a lot of training and a lot of informed conversations around how do we make ourselves better happen in education, in business, in production. And it often gets away from the cyclical and the production value. So in terms of building strategies, excuse me. So this idea of theta health is essential in supporting ourselves and our small communities, our large communities, and our environment as a whole.
That's where we're at, theta health.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So yeah, so theta health is when our brain is in an alpha state. As we probably all know, our brain is in an alpha state where we are awake. And then when it's in a beta state, we're asleep. So I've found this process of working within the theta state, which is not quite asleep and not quite awake. And when we're there, within our coaching sessions, we like to take the individual to this theta state so that they can drop out of all their conscious mind. And from here, once we get rid of the little thoughts in our heads, like the, I don't like this person because, or long time ago, this happened to me, so I've created this situation around this certain situation. Once we can let go of those little thoughts, we can really start to evaluate what the issues are of our preconceived notions, and our socially programmed thoughts stop getting in the way. And that's kind of where Jesse and I work really well together, because he takes that microcosm dynamic, and I come in on he takes the macrocosm, and I come in on a microcosm and work with the actual individual about why is this? Why are we thinking this way? And what's the barrier that's keeping us from actually moving forward and getting business done and communicating in an effective way? So the reason we put holistic care up here, because it is important to take in the to evaluate everything that's going on in an individual and in a group. Maybe someone's physical body is in pain, and it's just not making them as happy as they could be, or maybe they ate something that day that's just not agreeing with them. And so taking in this holistic view of the individual and of the group can really shed some light on what's the real issue here. Like, what is dropping out of the mind and dropping out of this thought? What is the real issue around what's stopping us from getting back to business? So yeah, just finding the root issue really helps us to define what's happening. And so that's where Theta Health comes in.
Take a pause and just see, we've thrown a lot of ideas in very esoteric, maybe new agey seeming understanding, and I want to make sure everyone doesn't have any lingering questions, wondering what on earth are these folks talking about, and that it does connect to what kind of issues are coming up in an HR sense for people working in small group dynamics consistently and regularly.
We can even take some questions if anyone has any right now before we move forward. How do you feel about that, Mac?
That's fine. I'm not seeing any coming in the block right now, so we can give them just a couple seconds.
Sure thing.
As we move forward in thinking about what we're doing here, this communication strategy, the root of knowing self and other, is about connecting to people where they're at with what you're comfortable doing in a way that's efficient and gets the job done. So the more we're aware, meta-aware, of the context with which the people we're engaging in exist in on a daily and in a historical context, the more we can be aware, the more efficiently we can deliver information to them. Mm-hmm. Now, that also means knowing ourselves and the principles in which we operate. So it's not necessarily casting the widest net possible. It's about casting the widest net probable, the widest net comfortable. So if you're, and I think one of the interesting questions that Leela and I talked about was the one that engaged this hierarchical dissemination of information and the idea of subverting that, disrespecting that, or moving around it. And that is a complex problem with a complex answer that can be delivered in a tangible way that requires it to be informed with a greater understanding of the needs of those who you're communicating with and the principles and amount of energy and time you have to put into that.
So Jesse and I were talking about this question earlier, and we always think as organizations that we need to know the people that we're selling to, right? We need to know their demographics, we need to know what they're into, so that we can retain them for our customers. But we think it's a very important part to actually know your people inside your organization, like marketing 101, right? Know their demographics, know what they're into, and then that way you can effectively find a way to communicate whatever you're trying to communicate in the way that they're ready to receive it. We had a lot of questions about how do we communicate over, so email's dead, newsletters are dead, how do we communicate over that? And we were talking about how it really comes down to who are the people in your organization to whom which you're trying to communicate. And so knowing the demographics around that will really help you find the solutions for that. And of course we do have solutions around that, but that is your first thing. That's the first thing you need to know.
So what do we have control over? And what are we going to do about that? We talked a lot about knowing your community, knowing your organization. And that's all well and good, but if you don't know what capacity you have and willingness you have to do that, then it's just useless data. And so I need to know in my engagements with other people, what is my bottom line? What am I willing to do? And I think that question about educating a staff in regard to cell phones in your office, or ways to communicate around race, class, and gender dynamics within your organization is, one, what's your organizational policy? And let's get down, what is the board and the management and the people whose decision it actually is? What do we feel about it? What are we actually willing to do? And then what do people within our organization need to feel comfortable? And that isn't the answer. That is the information with which we make a decision. And does our position need to change? Do we need to meet our staff where they are because they're too important to lose? Do I need to adjust my expectations of a certain way I'm being received and then change that? Or do I need to require that? And then if my bottom line isn't being met, if my boundary isn't being adhered to, what's my response? And that's a question that comes up a lot. So you set a boundary. I think about teaching a middle school class, right? So no talking while I'm talking. And then 3 kids talk and you get into a conversation and your line just got blurred, and it's not a hard line. And when we're talking about communication, these aren't hard and fast rules. If we don't have an awareness of our own personal policy or internal organizational policy, how far do we know we're being pushed in the other direction?
So I think it's really important to, well,
yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's really important. We were looking through some of the questions that you pre-submitted to this webinar, and there was one that I really wanted to answer about that came in from YWCA Boston, how to properly communicate the gender identity during hiring and onboarding. And you all may run into this a lot. So basically we just want to make sure that we say this because it's actually illegal to ask about someone's gender identity. And so it's really important you can ask, what pronouns do you use? And it's very important to get in the habit of just making it a part of your linguistical structure that you want to use they, them, and theirs. Even if you know the person doesn't have an issue around their gender identity or there's nothing around that, it's still good for your normal communication to come to a point where you're using they, them, and theirs, because these are gender neutral pronouns, and then we'll never, it makes a clear road for clear communication and compassionate communication for all those in your organization. I just want to make that very clear. So that goes along with language and the emotional accounting. Go ahead.
So how do we approach these kind of questions with a more, and it's hard to use the word dispassionate, but it's really important to remove some sentiment from these kind of difficult considerations around personal pronouns or homogenization or anglicizing names or how advertisements or internal communication is being received. And it's interesting that, and I start with this idea that we use accounting language, economic language, to describe our emotional and sentimental positions on things. And the idea of my bottom line is a fun way to start. It's how I inform a lot of my problem solving. My bottom line around how people communicate with me is informed by what I want from them. And I have some hard rules, and I have some not so hard rules. I have a comfort zone around how people think about my race and about the gender and culture that I come from. I have some comfort zones in regard to what I think people consider about my personal politics. And I need those to be met for me to be comfortable in an environment. Now, that comfort in that environment is directly related to the recompensation. So, frankly, and I think we all know, there's some willingness to put up with some stuff if it's worth it. And that's the other side of my bottom line is, yeah, it's worth it, or it's not worth it to me. And that's another real connection between the language of our emotional accounting. At some point, we all know folks, we all know scenarios where we say, you know what, it's just not worth it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What are we considering? What are we talking about when we say that? It's not a dollars and cents evaluation. The cost-benefit analysis is about our energy. There's a cohesion economic, a buy-in that we do when we think about engaging with people, how much energy it takes to deal with stuff. And sometimes it's really, really worth it. And sometimes it's not. And knowing our bottom lines is a start there. And to bring it to the cell phones, for example, if your bottom line is that you don't want cell phones going in your office, then that's your bottom line. And then it becomes, how do I communicate that boundary in an effective way? And how do I either disseminate that in a way that people are going to receive it, or make accommodations to replace those or incorporate those? So there's that baseball idea of wins over replacement value, that I want my staff to adhere to this standard. Now, they're not doing that. Is it worth it to replace that? Is it worth it to replace my standard? What will happen? Is it worth replacing the people? And that's, again, this built-in cyclical metacognitive process that we do all the time. But by naming it and starting to place markers on a scale of your own value, here's my bottom line, and here is my comfort zone, and here is where it is worth my energy to do this. Here's my needs. Here's my boundary. I can start recognizing that in other people. That then is the heart of this cultural mindfulness. I'm going to skip to this next page. The idea of cultural mindfulness, applying it and connecting it with compassionate communication, bringing these esoteric ideas together, knowing yourself, being aware of the energy and emotion that you're spending, the value of that time, how important is an issue to you. If we're talking about gender pronouns, how important is that to me? Mm-hmm. And how often, how much do I consider it? And where does that lie on my comfort zone? If my gender pronoun preference isn't being respected, or the way I would like people to discuss my politics or my race isn't being, if people are encroaching on that boundary, how close are they to my bottom line? How well in tune am I into what they're doing and why they're doing this? What can I do differently as it's happening? So cultural mindfulness and this meta-awareness connected with an analytic approach to human dynamics, because we can start applying some value to the energy that we're putting in to solving these problems and thinking of people engaging in these communication dynamics and making it valuable to them. And that's an interesting approach. And we'll go to this idea for a moment of the reliance on enterprise-wide email for operational information. I think Marilyn asked this question. I think it's a good one. And it seems like that might be far away from what we're talking about. Enterprise-wide email rather than face-to-face because they're impractical. And that seems like it might be a long way from what we're talking about, but it's not. And it's really at the heart of that. How valuable is it to you that this information get disseminated? And why aren't people valuing it in a way that engenders growth? Is it, and what is, blocking that communication? Face-to-face meetings are impractical, which is another way of saying it's not worth it to do face-to-face meetings all the time because it costs too much time and energy, and as a result costs money. However, we all know that it's necessary because it is worth it to meet with a client, to meet with your management, to meet with your staff, to know them. How do we define that balance? Is as much about knowing your organizational values and policies as your own? How much energy and time do you actually have? And how important is it to get a point across? Now, in the element of, and in thinking about enterprise-wide email, it's important to start thinking that all communication isn't created equal. And by having a cyclical meta-awareness of yourself and the other, when something needs to be sent as a banner, some pieces of information are just, hey, there's coffee and donuts in the break room. Well, that's a different communication than, here's a new policy that we're rolling out. And that's different than, hey, we have a project that we're all going to engage in. Let's create a database with a robust communication that evolves over time to meet the needs of education and training later on, and also informs decision-making in the near future on an on-task project. Knowing how people need to engage with that then informs the technology decisions and the platform on which you make that communication happen. Let's talk about resilience for a second, and I want Leela to take a moment and talk about resilience from a holistic and theta perspective, and then I want to talk about it from an institutional and systemic resilience perspective as well.
Yeah, so really resiliency within yourself is just this honest evaluation, like really knowing who you are. And it could even come down to like having a little journal, and really it's only for you because you need to know exactly who you are, and again, where are your core values and what are your needs, and we've been saying this over and over again in this webinar, but it's so important to actually know where your line is and how far you can go on that line. And then also beyond that, again, knowing just the core values of the people in your organization and how far they're able to go. So resilience just comes down to that, just being honest with yourself. I mean, honesty goes a long way. And yeah.
So to be honest, and that's to connect that with the question around gender identity, and that's a really topical issue. So this honest evaluation organizationally is defining your bottom line in the, not just in the context of the prevailing opinion today, but over the course of the history of your organization and your plans moving forward. So if your bottom line is that gender is this dynamic and it's like this, considering that in the context of public opinion. Now, is it important to draw a different line to meet the needs of your clients? And is that resonant with the organizational value? Now, there is a line, and that is something that the more honest we are about and aware of ourselves and aware of the people we work with and aware of the people that work for us, knowing where they stand, not just on a particular issue, but stand in the context of a public perception, then we can start making decisions institutionally with an informed awareness, not on the sentiment of the opinions around us or even internally, but with an awareness of them, and then a decision about how much energy and how much change we're willing to make. Resilience in that sense isn't rigidity. We're sticking to this. We only allow this to be part of this, or we only accept this type of people. It's important to do that. There are businesses, there are organizations that have made a decision to stick to their personal policies, their institutional policies that have an outside negative moral outcome. There are organizations from both sides of the political spectrum, both sides of all sides of gender dynamics, race and class dynamics, that have been pressured from the outside because of a negative public perception to make changes institutionally, and they've decided not to, and have been resilient doing so. There's other organizations that have made drastic changes and have opened their doors to different demographics than they intended, or started out to, some that would be incongruent to the standards with which they were founded, and they have been resilient. There is an optimization and awareness. The reason those stories are successful and the reason some are not is about an internal awareness and an awareness of how important it is to their survival. And having some awareness informs how flexible we need to be.
And knowing, and once we learn these strategies and once we learn these techniques that, well, us and others have put into place, then we can build upon those building blocks to have a solid foundation to move forward. And that is the resiliency. Like once we learn it, we know it. And I mean, it's a continuation. It's always changing, but just having those in place is the start of having resiliency within your organization and within yourself.
So how do we apply this? And that's the real question for HR. That's the real question for the board. That's the real question for our management. And what we offer is this connection. And from here, build your own awareness of your process and make it your own. And building in a cyclical standard, and within your decision-making process, however that occurs, to include an awareness of your own bottom line and where other people are coming from, and then determining your cost-benefit energetically and emotionally as well, embedding that into your own internal dialogue, being aware of, is it worth it? And I'm not going to do this, and this is a waste of my time, and wow, this has a lot of value. We can start seeing new ways to approach problem solving. So video, face-to-face, might be the way to connect with managers around the world. And it's very possible that a Twitter banner is the best way to connect with your audience in regard to a new flavor of chip or a new badge or a new entrance from the, the elevators back up and running. Or maybe it's a banner embedded within an app that's tailored to your company's needs. Or maybe that's a survey program that is engaging other people and asking questions and evolving over time. And maybe that's a more robust database that looks like a wiki, and it would appear like Reddit to some people, that then is searchable and trackable with keywords and tags over time that can be used as a history of communication around a particular subject. And knowing which and when of those to use is about knowing your organization and your staff and your clients and meeting them where they need, balanced against what you can do and what you have time, energy, and money to do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So this is where we would love to open it up for more questions, because that's what we love. Otherwise, we'll just make up questions.
We'll sit here and see if any come in.
Matt, do you mind if we talk about the question that you brought up?
You can go right ahead. That'd be great.
So here's a fun one that I bet everyone's run into. Hey, how do you pronounce your name? And is there an okay way to ask what culture someone is? And if you're not sure about someone's gender, how do you balance wanting to know, needing to know, and wanting them to tell you? And is there a way that is appropriate to ask? Or is it, I want to know this information, is there a way I should be asking that's going to get you to tell me? And that's what I and Leela are building, is an awareness of how do I figure out how they need me to communicate with them, and can I do that, and do I want to? And so engaging with in an environment where names are important and you want to know that, then hey, how do I ask this person in this moment is really essential, and it's not the same. And doing that in a lobby at a hotel is different than doing that in a boardroom, is different than doing that in a coffee shop, is different than doing it on the corner. And if we're not cognizant of those changes, as well as the changes in public perception and politics, then we'll miss it. And we'll miss an opportunity to build a connection that could be valuable to us. Now, if it doesn't matter what the barista thinks about how you pronounce the name, and it's not worth your time, then don't make it not worth your time, and make that decision in an informed way. Yes. There's a question, consider a proprietary app which would allow a more user-tailored interface, provide analytics. I think that's really great in regard to reducing transaction cost. That's an area I didn't talk about a lot when I was discussing this idea of analytics in the human dynamic and emotional accounting, is this transaction cost, the cost of doing business, not doing business in a cost benefit of dollars and a red line, but the cost of doing business with, I got to show up and work and deal with Jeff today. I got to show up and I got to listen to Karen. It's always Karen with her Bernie Sanders or Trump sticker, or she won't respect the way I want to be addressed, or she called me boy. I mean, ridiculous. Now, if we sat down and talked through it, we could get over it, and maybe HR needs to mediate a conversation, but the reality, what we want to impart is this is a costly negative emotional value that is a hidden efficiency killer. And we've been in, personally, I know that there are, I don't know that I've ever met someone that hasn't been uncomfortable with people they work with. And I don't, and have continued to see that that is something that costs people and organizations money. And it's not about removing those dynamics. the mistake that political correctness as a strategy has made and other communication strategies have made is an assumption of closure. We're going to get to the bottom of respecting gender, and we're going to find some closure to the way people think about class and race in America. It's not going to happen in a mediated environment in an office over the afternoon. What's going to happen is people are going to try and find a way that it's okay to engage with each other. And what it's about is being able to work together. Those bottom lines are, can we sit in this office? Can we do this project? Can we respect each other just enough to get through this? And we've long built an environment where we feel like sanctity and comfort is essential in the workplace and in personal life. And the evolution of discourse, in particular this newness over the last few years, is an indicator that that's not going to be the case. And it's not going to be the case anytime soon. And that because, and to bring it back to this Oscar and the Twitters that have come out, so there's only two positions. And as we boil down to any of these conversations, there becomes a polarity. Either you're on the side of or you're against them. There's an interesting theory, I forget what it's named, but any argument online will eventually be, someone will mention Hitler, eventually. Because we've built this good and evil polarity dynamic that we can't get away from. And as a result, if you're on the side that your small group feels is correct in that context, if you're an outsider in that context, no matter what your perception on politics or race or religion is. And your position is entrenched. There's not a lot of movement on those issues because people are holding on to those ideas more fervently than ever. And that's not a value judgment on those principles. It's a statement on how we solve the problems within them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, I can keep going, as this is a subject I'm passionate and very interested in. And I don't want to get too far away from how to apply this in the settings that are specific to your organizations. If you have questions or comments after this, you can go to uweus.com. I'm at jesse@uweus.com.
All right. Well, I think we don't have any questions today. So, but luckily, fortunately, I think we got a lot of questions when people registered. So, thank you for addressing all those.
No worries.
No problem. I appreciate both of you all for coming. We're out of time. So we'll go ahead and shoot up there for next month's webinar on April 3rd. It'll be the beginning of April rather than the end of March. We'll be talking about that wonderful nonprofit overhead myth that I know many of you deal with when you're dealing with your funders. So please disseminate that information, and we look forward to having you all back. And Jesse and Leila, I really appreciate you guys coming out today and helping us with this difficult topic.
Thank you, Mac, and we really appreciate you having us on. Thank you.
This has been great.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. Go ahead.
Bye-bye.